I want to give a big thanks to Media Temple. If you're looking for web hosting, just go to pencilversuspixel.com/Media Temple and get 25% off. Just use the code PVSP at checkout. Again, that's pencilversuspixel.com/Media Temple. Welcome to Pencil versus Pixel. My name is Caesar, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by the lovely Miss Grace Bonney of Design Sponge. Hi, Grace.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on the show. Grace is founder of Design Sponge, a design website that she has been running since 2004. She's also the author of the book Design Sponge at Home and host of After the Jump, a radio show and podcast where she talks to amazing folks in the creative community. Grace also provides business advice every week. If you plan on going independent or starting a creative business, we're going to cover just how to do that and how to get noticed. So Grace, before we continue, pencil or pixel?
I feel like I want to answer that with like hashtag pixel. I feel like I'm the most like digital person ever these days, way more than before. So pixel for the win. Yeah.
Cool. So Grace, I've given a little background about what you do, but tell us how you got where you are and a little bit more about what you do. What's your story?
Sure. My long story short, I'm a short person for start. I grew up in the South. I went to NYU for college, hated it, but loved the city. So I wanted to come back to the city as soon as possible. So I got a job in the record industry because that's what I thought I wanted to do at the time, although I had majored in fine arts. The record industry job didn't work out at all, which is good in the long run. And so I took the first job I could find in design, basically. And so I went on Craigslist back when like Craigslist was the way people found jobs. And I found a job in a very tiny PR firm that represented like some really great design houses like Vitra and Knoll Textiles and things that I already knew. And through that job, I kind of got my footing and made my contacts in design publishing, basically. And my goal was to work for a magazine, but I had absolutely no magazine experience. So I started the blog as a way to build like an online portfolio. And I thought if I just keep writing and showcasing the things that I think are interesting that aren't in print, eventually I can use this blog as like an application. And then instead, without knowing it, the magazine world kind of went down and the blog world went up. And so I think I was kind of in like the right place at the right time with the right content.
Awesome. So how exactly did you come up with the idea of your blog of Design Sponge?
Um, I didn't really think about it very much. I think the way most things that take on their own life, they start. I think if I had known what it would become, I would have planned it much differently. But I essentially was responding to what I wasn't seeing in the industry at the time. I was living in Greenpoint in 2003 when I moved to New York, and Greenpoint and Williamsburg at that time were just about to explode with like every interesting sort of counterculture designer that sort of made Brooklyn what it is now. And no one was writing about that. None of the big magazines were writing about it. The Times wasn't writing about it. And I was, 23 and had a camera and a blog and decided I would walk around and talk about all of the really amazing things I was seeing. So that's the only reason I started was I just felt like no one was covering the things I thought were interesting and nobody was covering like the DIY community. Or even like the handmade community, like Etsy wasn't even around. Yeah, there was no Etsy, there was no Domino magazine, all the things that are kind of linchpins of my end of the creative community, those things didn't exist yet. So I was writing about things and thankfully other people I think were feeling those same desires to like have that community represented, and some of them went into print and some of us went into web. And so I think that was where my initial desire came from.
So you pioneered the first publications, I guess you'd say, of what the culture or counterculture of Brooklyn.
I highly doubt anybody in Brooklyn would think of Design Sponge as counterculture. I think it's counterculture to the traditional design market,
Yeah.
like the fancy design community. But yeah, I think without trying to, we definitely were a part of that movement. I think Apartment Therapy had been open for like maybe 4 or 5 months when I started, and the same with Loco Loco, which is a Canadian design blog, and those had both been open for like a year max. So we were really kind of the first people to step out and cover design, which now seems so weird, but we were very much kind of doing things before, anybody else decide to make a job.
Yeah, definitely. So Design Sponge started as a blog, but
Hmm.
I personally consider you more of. I mean, you're in media more than just blogging. What's your how do you feel about blogging nowadays? Is it something that's sort of fading away? Is it something that's here to stay? Is it morphing into something different?
I think blogging in the way that at least our community knows it is dying. It's dying rapidly. Like every day, there's something else that happens that I think sort of undermines the current financial support system for blogging, which was terrifying for a while, and now I think is actually probably a good thing and puts us all back on our toes and makes us more creative to try to figure out a way to support ourselves. And for me, the biggest challenge is like, how do you continue to support a site ethically, which for me means like, how do I pay my writers, give them health insurance, do all the things that I think are incredibly important for people who give you all their time and all their effort. But how do you do that in an economy that's just not supporting this platform anymore? So for us, the answer has been to think of Design Sponge not just as a blog, but to think of it as sort of like a platform for something, and in what way do we deliver messages. And so some of that's in radio, some of that is going to be in print, some of that will be in actual print like in books and like possibly magazines and things like that down the road. But I think right now we're just testing everything out. And for me, like I find social media so fascinating and so like instantly responsive, that platform to me, I don't think anyone's really figured out how to utilize that or monetize it really. But I think it's a platform that is just so interesting, and it reminds me so much of what blogging used to be. I think that blogging used to be this very instantly responsive community, and now people don't actually talk. They just kind of click a like button or they repin something, and it's not the same thing as a conversation. And not that deep political conversations are being had on Instagram, but there's still more conversation happening there than there is on a blog these days, at least most blogs. So I find that platform really fascinating. So I think we're testing everything out right now, and I consider us like a voice, and we're just trying to figure out the best home for that right now.
Do you think the social media boom is going to continue, or do you think it's going to change maybe into something different?
I mean, I think there's a part of me that because I grew up in an era where like print was the end all be all, I truly believe that everything is kind of cyclical. And I think that even though blogging's like kind of dying right now, at least in our community, it is. I don't think that means it's always going to be dead, and I don't think that means that social media will always be the king of everything. Although I do think it's sort of indicative of a larger internet behavior, which is that I don't think people look like Pinterest in particular, and other platforms. It's made people their own curators of content.
Yeah.
And I think they used to look to bloggers to create those sort of, I mean, curated is kind of a loaded word. Like there's a whole online argument about whether the word curated should be used for blogs anyway. But for lack of a better word, I think people used to look to bloggers as experts. And now I think they're like, well, I don't need you because I have my own Instagram feed and my own Pinterest page and my own Tumblr page. And so they don't really need you in the same way. And they don't, for that reason, I think, attribute the same importance to crediting or sort of attribution in the same way that sort of 1.0 blogging culture did. So I think it's kind of the Wild West right now, but I think that's exciting. I kind of love it. It's like re-leveled the playing field in a really interesting way.
So true, so true. You talk a lot about independent work. You talk a lot about marketing. Well, let me take it back a little bit before I continue with that. You're the host of After the Jump, right? Where you also interview really awesome creative folks. Lately, I've listened to your podcast and noticed that you've been talking a lot about things that would be helpful for people that want to begin an independent career or people that run businesses, creative businesses. And so you give a lot of great business advice, a lot of general business advice and marketing advice. What motivated you to give back in that form to the creative professional community?
I think there are two things that are always driving any business content I do, whether it's on the site or it's on the radio show. I think the first one is 100% selfish, which is I need to learn these lessons as much as everybody else does. I think half the time I come up with a radio show, I come up with every radio show like the week I do the radio show, sometimes the day I do the radio show, primarily A, I'm lazy, but B, I also I like things to be of the moment, and I like them to feel like important and like they're on the tip of my tongue. And so I really try to pick a topic that's like something I'm struggling with. And so if I do a show about like the importance of dealing with change, or how like the importance of embracing social media, it's because I'm trying to teach myself the same thing. So I think a lot of times if I take the time to write it down in sort of tip or advice form, I'm giving that to myself as much as anybody else. So that's one big driving force. The other is honestly just being a part of the community and listening to the things people are struggling with, whether that's people who do exactly what I do or people that I interact with that I've written about. Those people everyone's kind of upfront with each other, and they'll say like, I'm really having a hard time, dealing with interns, or having a hard time dealing with taxes. And so that sometimes just spurs a topic. And I think like, let's talk about this today, because it seems like something that's in the air, but nobody's talking about. So I try to listen to both ends of the spectrum, things that I'm dealing with internally and things that the community seems to be dealing with, but isn't talking about yet.
How do you keep informed about current trends in the industry?
I read a lot. I read I read everything on the internet that I can get my hands on in terms of what people are saying on a one-to-one basis. Like, what are people saying on their Twitter feeds? What are they saying on their Instagram feeds? What are they saying on their blogs? I consume all that, but I also consume as many business books and sort of thought pieces as I can a week of interesting people, whether it's like Seth Godin or it's somebody like Jessica Hish or somebody else just sort of interesting within the online community who has something to say. I think at this point, everyone's opinion is pretty valid and important. And I think there's so many examples of people doing things within the rules and outside of the rules that it makes me want to listen to everybody's point of view. And it may not always work for my business, but I think that the more I'm listening, just sort of it hands you more tools for your tool belt, so that when an issue comes your way, you may think, okay, well, this way that like Seth Godin told me to fix the problem isn't going to work. But the really creative idea that Jessica Hish had about like getting the word out about her drop cap series might apply to me in that situation. So I think that I, in general, just try to consume as much information as possible and then trust my brain to like make that all work out in some sort of way that creates a solution. But I think that the reason I have like such a terrible title for my website with the word sponge in it, it's a horrible word to have to say like a dozen times a day, but it's very applicable to the way I actually function as a person. I think I consume a lot of content and advice and then try to make sense of it.
Do you consider yourself a design sponge? Do you soak in all of this information and
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's the way I function. I think I function as someone who's like obsessively into something, and then like I research and consume every single thing I can find about whatever that topic is, or a person, or an artist, or a band, or whatever it is, and I like just consume everything. And I think that's part of the reason I like the internet so much, is that the vast majority of that information exists online and it's free. So I love that about that. So I think my personality, I think, will always be that way. And for what I work in right now, it's a good thing.
Very cool. All right. So for the person that wants to go independent, the person that wants to start their own freelance career or business, maybe on the side, or they want to, they probably want to jump and do their own thing, right? What's your first recommendation? What do you recommend that person to do before they decide to make the jump? Now that we're talking about making jumps.
Yeah. I think that it's what that old saying about measure twice and cut once. I think that's probably the best piece of advice, is to really think about the decision you make before you make it. I think in my community, a lot of bloggers, like, it's not happening this second, thank God, but I think a lot of people were like just quitting jobs and then being like, I have something to say about graphic design, so I'm going to start a blog. And that's a terrible idea, not only because it's financially very difficult to make viable right now, but it puts a lot of pressure on you creatively to then make decisions that are based on trying to stay afloat. And I think no blog or website benefits from trying to make decisions that are solely about financial survival. So I think the more you can plan any sort of move to go independent or to leave like a full-time job, the more you can plan, talk to like a financial advisor, talk to a bookkeeper. They're all worthwhile, because I see so many wonderful business ideas fail because of planning. And then that person thinks like, oh, well, this idea wasn't good. But that wasn't actually it. Your idea was great. You just didn't plan well, and you just didn't give that business idea the chance to be as successful as it could have. So I think really planning something is good. I used to hate the idea of like talking to a lawyer and talking to, like a contract advisor or something. But those people do their jobs for a reason. And I think they're worth investing in because you can give your business, even if it's just like a blog, if you can give it the platform that it needs and the best chance of survival, that's the best thing you can do for yourself. Otherwise, you're just scrambling to like try to sell ads or promote yourself online so that you can get more numbers and sell more ads and support yourself. Like, it should really start as a creative process.
Can you tell us about a time when you had a major struggle with your business, something that you really, uh, you something you really learned from, and this is the one thing that I would tell, a business owner to do or not to do, or that's kind of a
Sure.
terrible way to ask that question, but
Oh no, well, I understand. I understand what you're saying. I think my honest answer is there isn't a time when I'm not feeling that way. And I think I mean, that's like funny in a sense, but it's very honest. And I think that if people accept that businesses are never going to be in this perfect safe space, like that doesn't exist. In my community, I deal with a lot of like women running businesses, and those women are always struggling with this idea of like, how do I have a family and run a business and have it all? And like that doesn't exist. Like the idea of this perfect balanced place does not exist in the same sense that having learned all your business lessons and being done and being safe exists. Like you're always going to be like adjusting the scale, and you're going to make a mistake, and then you're going to learn something new. So I think I'm in a place with my business where I've accepted that change is the only constant. So I think I'm always learning something. I think right now it's really just about reevaluating decisions that are important for my business versus decisions I think other people think I should make. I constantly go back and forth on whether or not I'd like to have an office. Like we have a large office in Brooklyn right now that we got primarily because one of our main editors was like, I hate working at home. It's not working for me. I'm not efficient at home. And I thought, okay, like this is a good business expense. We were at that point in a place where like we had expendable income. And so I thought, let's get us an office. We'll expand into it and teach classes. And then for the first year, we really did. And now we don't use it as often as we should for being such a large investment. And I think all of us are much more efficient working at home now. But then I think to myself all the time, like, well, won't it look terrible if I don't have an office? And won't it look like my business is failing if I don't have this like face on the front of something?
yes.
And it's like, well, who am I trying to prove that to? And can I prove the same thing by just being a successful business? Like, does it have to have an office? And so I think that sort of struggle is something I have every day is like, am I making this decision because it's the one that's the best for our team? Or am I making it because I'm concerned about what it looks like from the outside? So I think that's a big part of an online business, weirdly, is like trying to manage perception versus like what's actually important to you as a business owner.
Well, there's a lot of people that are working remotely now too. Seems to be the big
Yeah.
thing.
And I mean, I did that for 7 years. That was how I ran the business and was fully happy that way. But then brought on team members and I wanted them to be happy. And that's another adjustment is if you go independent and you're successful at some point, you might want to bring on people to help you. And being a boss that has employees is a very different situation than being a boss. It's just you and your company. Like it's a very different thing to essentially have to learn how to be like an HR person because it's not necessarily as fun as it is to just like be your own boss. So that's always a struggle for me because I'm not a natural. I don't think I'm a natural team leader. I don't think I am. I very much am like a sort of loner solo person. So it's been a lot of like growth for me trying to figure out how to be my own best version of that.
When was the time that you knew you had to get an employee, that you had to bring someone on as an employee?
I think I accepted pretty early on the thing I learned weirdly from Martha Stewart was that I did not from her personally. We're not like friends, but Martha Stewart is my gold standard of everything. I don't feel the need to be as perfect as I think her brand looks on the outside. But I think it's fine to aim for that. But I think one thing I didn't enjoy about the magazine was that I didn't feel like the individuals who worked there got as much credit or sort of attention for being the people who actually did the work. And I understand that from a brand perspective to not want to have one person get bigger than the umbrella they're working for. But for me at the time when I was starting out, I thought, well, I'm clearly not an expert in everything I'm writing about. So why on earth would I pretend to be? So when I brought on like DIY writers and Christina, who was my first and only food writer, I was like, well, I'm not going to pretend that I'm the person writing this, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm the person who knows a lot about food, because I don't. I just enjoy it. So why wouldn't I bring on somebody whose life is about this? So when I brought people on, it made sense to me logically to look for people for whom whatever that topic was their sole passion, and I knew what mine was. And so I thought, well, then my job is to find the equivalent of me, but in a different field. And so that's when I went and found those people. And so it was a very slow but logical extension of the site.
For those who don't know, what is your passion?
I think what I've learned about myself in the last 10 years of running this site is I really enjoy being a problem solver. I think that the skill I have is connecting people. I definitely don't know the answers to everything or anything for that matter, but I think I'm very good at figuring out who does know the answers to things and then connecting the person who needs that information with the person who has that information. And then I think over the last couple of years, I've gotten very good at teaching the audience that has that information why it's important to give that information to the community that needs it, maybe for free at first, and then how to pull them in as clients. And then I think I've gotten better at teaching the people who are the potential clients why it's important to invest in professional advice. So I think I'm like the intermediary right now, which is a place I really enjoy being in that place.
Do you plan on continuing to provide business advice to creative, independent people out there, or is this something that you see yourself doing a lot more of?
Yeah, I think definitely. I really enjoy it. I think my favorite part of my job right now is anything to do with like business and sort of life advice in a way. Not because I have the answers, but because I think it is this underlying current that connects all of the different sort of niches within the creative community. Because I think a lot of times, like interior design people don't talk to the typeface community, and people in those communities don't always mix together very well or at all. And so I think if you actually break it down to like, we're all business owners, we're all people who try to manage these careers that are very much a part of our daily lives, which is not the case in a lot of other non-creative communities. Like it's a little bit easier sometimes to separate your life and work, but if you're a freelancer, your work comes home with you a lot of the time. So I think we all have that in common. So that's something I really enjoy talking about. So I'll keep doing it until I feel like it's saturated and the community doesn't need it anymore. And that's kind of when I started the site, my whole goal was like, how do I give the handmade community a platform? That was what was important to me. And now I feel like that community more than has a platform. Like there are a million handmade sites. I think people understand what handmade work is, why it's important. Like Etsy very much like made that an international campaign. And so I feel very happy that community has a voice now, not because of me, but because that's happened online now. And so I think very much until I feel like every small business owner knows exactly where to find the advice they need, I'll be happy to continue to work as like somebody who tries as hard as they can to connect that information with people who need it.
Very cool. Yeah. Where do you see Design Sponge going the next few years?
I don't know, to be honest. I think we'll continue to be in whatever form we can stay alive. I think we'll continue to try to bring inspiration and information to the creative community. I think I'm very unsure about like where blogging is going to go as a platform, and so I think we're trying out a lot of different forms of delivering information to see what resonates with people, because it's not just about like what's financially viable. It's very much about like how does this community want to receive that information. And I think it remains to be seen how does the creative community want to get their advice? How do they want to get their inspiration? Like right now they're getting it from a mix of like mobile platforms and social media and RSS feeds. And I think all of us never thought like the homepage would die, but it has. Like that's what's happened very quickly. So I think we're just testing out a lot of stuff to see what works. And for me, I'm really enjoying that test phase, because good and bad, when you test things, you get a lot of feedback. And I've kind of missed being in a place where people felt free and had the platform to say like, this sucks, or this is going really well. I really enjoy that. So I think it's kind of fun for me right now. It's a little scary, but it's fun.
That's sort of the beauty of social media, is that you get a lot of instant feedback. This is working, this is not, this is good, this is bad.
Wouldn't it be nice if negative feedback was actually that constructive? I don't feel like
Yeah.
Like, let people say, like, posted some picture on Instagram this weekend of like this, which I thought was a cool moment. We had like a hashtag challenge where people were showing us like beautiful rugs they had in their homes, and this girl took a photograph of shoes on a rug in her home, and I had the same rug, and I loved her shoes, and I ended up buying the same shoes. So I took a photograph of like my shoes on the same rug, like haha, and sent her an at reply. But it was public, obviously. And there were all these comments that were like, ew, OMG, your feet are totes Uggs, and that sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, I forgot.
What?
I forgot about this early stage of any platform when you haven't really weeded out the people who like just don't have anything like,
Everyone that's trolling around.
which is fine. Like I think it's hilarious, and I forgot that that's what blogging used to be. Like my blog used to be full of comments from people who were like, "I hate your hair," like "You're stupid," blah blah blah, and which to me is like that's the early stages of anything, and in a way, it's I kind of really enjoy having that. It's fun, it's interesting, which is great.
What is your number one productivity tool? One that you would recommend for creatives out there, whether independent or not.
It's simple, but I think the best tool technically that I use is Boomerang for Gmail. It's super old, I guess, in terms of tech tools now, but continually makes the largest effect on my day-to-day work life because I think it used to be just bloggers, I feel like, that had this problem, but now everybody I know gets like several hundred emails a day. And if email is a big part of what you do, whether you're dealing with client requests or emails from readers or whatever it is, finding a way to manage that and not feel overwhelmed is a huge part of my job. So Boomerang made a massive difference and like just mentally being able to clear all these things that were in my inbox. And I know that's just because they're there doesn't mean that that work is like has to be done right away, but physically seeing all of that was such a mental load. So to be able to like move all this stuff away and focus on what I'm doing is a big part of what I do. So I think Boomerang is the best thing that I use.
That's Boomerang for Gmail.
Yeah, I think it's like $5. It's pretty cheap, but it allows you to like send things later or have emails come back to you. Hence, like the name Boomerang. It's fantastic. I love it.
Awesome. And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So everyone, you can find that and everything we talked about here today on pencilversuspixel.com. That's pencilvspixel.com/Grace Bonney. Grace, what about a book? Do you have a book that you recommend?
Um, I have so many books that I read that are like business-based books that I would recommend. But I think right now the one I'm really really enjoying is a book of all things by this really wonderful Buddhist teacher named Pema Chodron, and she wrote a book a while back called "Living with Uncertainty," I believe is the title, or "Living with Change." That had been suggested to me so many times, and I feel like I truly believe like books come to you when you're ready to finally read them. And I finally ordered this one and have been reading it. And I feel like if you work on the internet, the earlier you can learn to like really deal with how difficult it can be to have everything change around you all the time, the better of a business owner you'll be. So I'm reading that one right now. And I think it's very valuable for me as a business owner to kind of learn how to deal with change and things constantly being in flux, but still provide kind of a stable, comforting presence to the people who work with me, because otherwise I think I'll just terrify them and be like, oh my God, this changed. Now this is changing. How are we going to pay for this? I don't know. And that's, no one wants to work for that person. So I'm trying to learn how to like be calm about all the changes. So that book has been really great. And Pema is like kind of a guru-ish figure to a lot of people. And I'm not a practicing Buddhist, but I think that she's a wonderful, wonderful writer. So it's been a really important book for me to work through.
Wow, that's a really great book recommendation. So she's a Buddhist?
She's a monk. She's a Buddhist monk, and she leads like, very important seminars, and she speaks, as well as she has these sort of like retreats she does. I've never been to any of them, but every sort of important person in my life who I've sort of considered like someone I look up to is somebody who happens to follow her, either like as their actual religious choice or just as someone they think is really important. And so she's been recommended to me for years now. And I kind of thought like, well, I'm not a particularly religious person, so I won't have any connection to this. But just as a human being, I think she has wonderful advice. And I think any business owner eventually gets to a place where they need to have advice that deals with more than just like the nuts and bolts of their job. So I think this book has been really nice because every blogger I know is kind of freaking out right now about how are you going to support a blog? How are you going to support a team when like online advertising is kind of dying right now? So I think it's really good and very comforting to have somebody give you some tools to kind of deal with constant changes in the landscape. So I'm loving it right now.
Now, speaking of advice, you've given a lot of tips and advice today, but if there's one piece of advice that you would give to the creative professional, to the creative independent, freelancer, artist, designer, what would that tip be?
Trust your gut. I think trusting your gut is the most important thing any business owner can do because there's no one right way to do anything. If there was, everyone would be doing it. So I think really trusting your gut and making decisions that are right for you and what you and your business believe in are the only thing that are going to keep you going, because it's so easy in this sort of online community to listen to 200 different forms of advice and tips. And I mean, I'm one of those voices. And so I think it's good to listen to those things, but to always make the decision based on like what you actually feel internally is the most valuable thing you can do.
Love it. Grace, where can people say hi? Where can we find you?
Designsponge.com is always the main drag, but I feel like I personally spend the majority of my time on Instagram these days. So I'm the only person who runs our feed, so it's Instagram.com/designsponge. So say hi, tell me my feet are ugly, whatever you want to do. Come say hi.
And everyone, you will be able to find that information on pencilversuspixel.com/Grace Bonney. All the show notes, everything we talked about will be right there. So you could, just from the click of a button, click of a link actually, you find where to say hi. Grace, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you everyone for being here today too. We'll see you next week. Bye everyone.